3 days. That's how much time is left before the next major deadline surrounding the Clarity Act, and XRP investors are watching closely. The big question now is simple. Could XRP break below $1 if the Clarity Act fails to move forward? Right now, the market is already under pressure. XRP has been struggling around the $1 level, while investors are becoming increasingly frustrated with the continued political drama in Washington. And this is exactly why the next few days could become extremely important. According to the source transcript, Senator Cynthia Lummis said lawmakers would not simply leave for the August recess without getting votes on several bills, including the Clarity Act. She argued that after roughly 11 months of negotiations and hundreds of pages of changes, it is time to put lawmakers on the record. But there is a major question hanging over the situation. What happens if the vote doesn't go the way investors are hoping? The market may already be preparing for that possibility. The transcript specifically points to the possibility of another sweep lower for XRP, potentially taking the price below $1. And here's where things get interesting. For months, investors have been waiting for regulatory clarity, expecting that clearer rules could eventually encourage more institutional participation in crypto. But while the United States continues dealing with the Clarity Act drama, Ripple's international expansion hasn't stopped. The transcript highlights Ripple's regulatory progress in Europe, including its MiCA authorization in Luxembourg, which could allow institutions across the European Union to access Ripple payments through a regulated relationship. So while the US debate continues, the broader XRP ecosystem is still developing internationally. That creates a very unusual situation. The regulatory story isn't simply bullish or bearish. On one side, investors are frustrated because the United States still hasn't provided the clarity they want. On the other side, adoption and regulatory progress are continuing outside the US, and if the Clarity Act fails or gets delayed again, the immediate market reaction could be emotional. That doesn't necessarily mean XRP's long-term story is finished, but it could create another period of volatility and potentially another test of the $1 level. The biggest mistake would be assuming that $1 is guaranteed support. It isn't. If XRP breaks below it, the important question won't simply be how low can it go. The real question will be, why did it break, and what happens immediately afterward? Because the next few days could tell us a lot about whether XRP is preparing for another major shakeout, or whether the market is getting ready for something completely different. So what happens if XRP actually breaks below $1? This is where the next few days become especially interesting. A move below $1 could create fear across the XRP community, but it could also become the kind of moment long-term investors have been waiting for. The key is not to automatically assume that either outcome is guaranteed. The current debate around the Clarity Act has created two very different expectations. Some investors believe lawmakers will finally get the bill moving and that regulatory clarity could help create a stronger environment for crypto adoption. Others have completely lost confidence. They've watched deadlines move, negotiations continue, and expectations build again and again. For those investors, another delay would simply confirm what they've already started believing. Nothing is going to happen anytime soon, and that difference in expectations could make the market extremely volatile. But there's another part of this story that shouldn't be ignored. Even while the US regulatory process remains uncertain, the XRP ecosystem continues developing internationally. The transcript points to Ripple's progress in Europe and its MiCA authorization in Luxembourg as an example of regulatory progress happening outside the United States. That matters because it shows that the XRP story isn't completely dependent on what happens in Washington over the next few days. At the same time, investors shouldn't use international progress as an excuse to ignore the risks. If the Clarity Act fails to advance, sentiment could still take a hit. And when sentiment is already weak, even a relatively small negative development can create a much larger reaction in price. That's why the $1 level has become so psychologically important. If XRP holds above it, investors may interpret that as a sign of resilience. If XRP briefly dips below it and quickly recovers, some may view it as a shakeout. But if XRP breaks below $1 and continues falling, the market may start asking a much more uncomfortable question. Was $1 actually support, or were investors simply hoping it was? That's the question we need to watch. Because the next major move may not be determined by the headline itself. It could be determined by how investors react after the headline. And with only 3 days left, expectations are already extremely high, so don't just watch for the vote. Watch the price reaction, watch market sentiment, and watch whether XRP can hold its ground when the uncertainty reaches its peak, because the final question is becoming impossible to ignore. If XRP breaks below $1, Will that be the beginning of a deeper decline or the opportunity everyone wishes they had recognized earlier? So 3 days from now, we could have a much clearer picture of where XRP stands. But remember, the outcome of a vote or another delay doesn't automatically determine XRP's long-term future. What matters is how the market responds. If XRP holds $1, that could show that buyers are still defending this level. If it breaks below $1, we could see another wave of fear and volatility. And that's exactly why this moment matters. Don't just ask, will the Clarity Act pass? Ask the bigger question, what will XRP do if it doesn't? Because that's where the real opportunity or the real risk could appear. 3 days, one major deadline, and one level everyone is watching. So tell me in the comments, will XRP stay above $1, or are we about to see another breakdown? Subscribe to OG John XRP Insights, and I'll see you in the next update.